Um.
So it's not
Okay.
okay to talk about unicorns and lingerie now, or oh, we're live now. Sorry, that's my bad.
Hello, everyone, to a very fun and niche-filled episode of the 60-Day Novel Challenge with your hosts, myself, Doug Lansborough, Hank Garner, and Josh Hayes. We are in week 7, the second last week of the novel challenge, and we'll get to this topic today. But I'm behind. I'm behind right now. And so we're going to dedicate some time to what to do if you're behind. But today we are talking about the second part of the second act, kind of the meatier part of the second act, specifically the midpoint, and then the mindset change that comes after that as we go into the third act and eventually the climax of your novel. So this is a very big deal, and we're going to dive deep into it. But what I want to emphasize is that even though we call this part, this beat, the midpoint, it doesn't have to be in the middle. Some people will say it has to be at 50%. Josh, I think you said before yours is at like 75% of the way through, maybe. Mine's at 60 to 75%. Like it varies from novel to novel. But we call it the midpoint. That's just, whoever made the 3-act structure, they chose that. So we stick with it.
They chose the chaos. We choose to go along with it or not. Yeah.
Hello, Erica. Yes, and hello to everyone in the chat. Feel free to say hi. I've been gone for a whole week. I've been missing these live videos and all of the people that join us for these live streams and the writing sprints and all the good stuff we have going on this month. So I'm very happy to be here.
We've just been making jokes about, could you imagine going on vacation in the middle of the 60-day writing challenge?
Listen, I didn't choose this. I've scolded. So for those who don't know, my brother got married last week, and I was so hard done by. I had to go to Jamaica to support him in this wedding, and
your
have a good
burdens
time.
are many.
I know, right? Most people don't understand the struggles.
Older or younger brother? I don't think
younger brother.
Younger brother.
Yeah,
you did have a choice. You could have bullied him like you've done for the preceding 30 years.
But they planned this a while ago, and I have bullied them and saying, hey, I have a lot going on this month. I have this really cool challenge that we're doing, and they're like, we're getting married, and I said, okay, I guess I'll be there. So
whatever.
But now we're back. We're
he
writing.
Needs to get his priorities straight.
Right. His brother's job or his lifelong happiness. Thank you, NJ.
Hi, NJ. Hi, Paula. Hi, Jane. Hi, Ashley. Hi, Erica. So glad to have you all with us today.
Yeah. All right, Hank. How are you on this fine day? How's the novel coming? How's the challenge going?
I'm doing really well. Let me pull my project up real quick. It's actually up. I just need to get it on the screen. I am at 32,963 words written with 17 days left. So that gives me an average of, or a remaining total of 17,037 words, which is a daily goal of just over 1,000 words. So I've written ahead, and not intentionally written ahead, but I think I've explained what my process has been for this time. I get up early in the morning, and I write 12 to 1,500 words, and then during the writing sprints, I kind of go back over my writing and I onion it out and add filler and not filler, but flesh out things that need to be fleshed out. And I've done that each day, and when I have met my writing goal, I don't just arbitrarily cut it off. If I'm in the middle of something and it's working and the words are flowing and it's not a chore, I just keep doing it until I finish the task I'm working on. And I went to Author Nation in Las Vegas I left Sunday about lunchtime, got home Tuesday really late. And so I had some extra words written, which really helped. Because I found myself writing at odd times and odd places. And while I think I got my minimum word goal for the day, but it was normally about that 1,200 word instead of like 1,700 or 2,000 words like I had been getting. So that helped a lot. So if you find yourself, and I know we're going to talk about this later, but this is my personal experience from this week. If you find yourself where you have an opportunity to write some extra words, it really does pay off in those crunch times where life gets a little chaotic and weird.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, Josh, before I go to you, I want to just emphasize that point. For anyone who was at our How to Succeed at Nano workshop on the 1st of the month, one of the things that we pointed out is that look at your calendar and try to identify, 10 to 15 minute blocks of time where you aren't doing anything. Maybe it's a transition time between, work and making dinner or what have you. You're waiting to pick your kid up at school. Get some words in then. Right, you get 200, 300 words in that bonus time 3 times a week, then you're 600 to 1,000 extra words that week. That's huge. That's big progress. But Josh, how is your writing going? How's the book coming along?
Well, I mean, just to cherry pick on the point you just made, I did that this week and last week in my project, where I've been kind of bouncing between my desktop and laptop, and then was writing on my phone on the browser version of Dabble, waiting for the kids' volleyball games to start and everything else. So I've been kind of hitting it pretty good. I am sitting around 19,000 words. I'm about like 4,200 behind where I should be for the month, but almost I would say probably 15,000 words of those words came since Monday. The week before, I was kind of bouncing between this project and another project I've been trying to wrap up, and spent too much time on the other project and didn't get anything substantial done on this one. So most of that progress has come this week. I plan to be ahead by Friday. I've got today I've got a little over 2,500 today, and I plan to hit about 4 by the time I'm done, and then 4 or 5 on Friday, which will put me over even. And then I'll just press forward from there. But it's coming really well. Chapters are going well. The planning is still on par. I just finished a chapter that I knew I needed. I just didn't know how I was going to present it. And I actually wrote like 1,400 words worth of narrative before I realized I was writing from the wrong POV and had to go back and switch it. But it worked out. It got me to where I needed to be to know how to completely write it. And
Let me ask you this, Josh. Let me ask you this, Josh. In writing the wrong POV, I know that's a hassle. You're like, oh shoot, I'm doing the wrong thing. But did that give you any insight into like maybe something you could add? Like anytime I make a mistake like that, I look for places like, whoa, is this helping me think in a different way? Or I don't know. Have you experienced that at all?
Yeah, I mean, in this, I knew that I needed I needed a way into the cartel's perspective, and I also needed a way to show to foreshadow the actual bad guys. And so the original way that I wrote the scene was from the POV that gets shot by one of the Korean spies that's there. But I don't like writing POVs, especially introductory POVs, in which that POV is killed at the end of the sequence. I think that is, I don't know. I just don't like doing that.
Yeah.
And so when I got to the end and I realized the POV that I had been writing is the one who's going to get shot, I added in another POV to basically watch the guy get shot, and then that guy escapes, and that gives me the in to the cartel, and it also gives him the opportunity to identify who the shooter was.
Right.
And it also gave me the opportunity to do something that I really, really dislike most of the time in fiction and even in TV, which are bait and switch scenes where you think you're watching something, but it's actually something else. And a little example of that is this, where the first couple of chapters are following the good guys, and they're in a black SUV and they're wearing black uniforms. And in this chapter that we see from the cartel's perspective, he's talking about the black SUV coming back and the men in black getting out of the SUV, but they're wearing masks. The good guys are wearing helmets and nods, and so you could kind of maybe think that he's thinking those as masks, but they're not. And as I play through the scene, I'm trying to give the impression that he's watching the good guys. But then when his friend gets shot and he runs away, one of the men in black BDUs takes off his mask and he sees that he's Asian. And so we know that it's not the main character. And so that kind of bait and switch, you see that a lot where you're the author is setting something up and trying to point you in a wrong direction, but it's kind of usually it's not worth it. Usually it's just like, how you could have done that another way. Halfway through writing this, I was like, oh, this would be a cool thing if I could like make the reader think that it's the good guys. But I think I pulled it off. We'll see.
Yeah.
The reviews will let you know.
Yeah. I'll hear about it for sure.
Yeah, see Kara saying if a bait and switch is done right and you actually enjoy it. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
If the bait and switch, slow down, Hank. If it leads you to new information,
right.
I think it's valuable then, because then you're like, oh, this gives me a new perspective I wouldn't have been able to get any other way. And I'm obviously not, saying how to do it because I have no idea, but I could see where that could be valuable and not just annoying if you can use that as a way to introduce new information to the story.
For sure.
Yeah.
I'm just going to take a moment here to catch up on some of the comments that we have in the chat. Like Mina said that her approach might not be good, but I divide into an overall midpoint for the crime plot and a personal revelation or point of no return where my characters shift their perspective, which, as we'll discuss today, I mean, that's basically it. And they are not all of that happens in one scene, right? It's what we've talked about a lot with scene and sequel, or Josh, what do you call the emotional moment after an action moment?
More of a bridge between action. Now you've asked the question and I completely blanked on.
You've said it like a dozen times through these shows.
I know.
It'll come up naturally, don't worry. As Josh dwells on that. So if you break it up, that's fine. And the point of structure is not to be prescriptive about what you're writing, but give you those guidelines to make sure that you're on the right course and that you're hitting the right beat. So if you spread it out a little bit, I think that's okay. I don't know if these distinguished gentlemen disagree with that or not, but if you do, then I'll kick you off.
I have as much control of this live stream as you do.
Yeah, that's true.
Zing.
NJ can't
I love when he does
axe
that and he shifts over to the other side of the
Yeah.
Right, everybody rearranges.
Yeah.
NJ can't remember the acts in a story. Well, if you're following the 60-day template, we're doing the 3-act structure, which at like a high level, the 3 acts are broken up into, well, act 1, 2, and 3. But act 1 is, your ordinary world, your inciting incident. And I think they call it plot point 1, or the first plot point, which is where your character makes a decision, a point of no return decision, to Mina's point, to pursue something because of the inciting incident. And then the second act is rising action, the midpoint, and then plot point 2, which is, again, that reflection on the midpoint, which, as we'll discuss, is just this devastating, hey, you've been making progress? Too bad. Sucks to be you. And then the third act is pre-climax, climax, and falling action, which we will discuss next week. So if take a look at the template, and there's a little bit of a breakdown of the different acts in there based on the weeks that we're in, but don't feel like you have to commit it all to memory either. A lot of storytelling you'll find is very natural and follows that kind of pattern, but you put your own spin on it as you go. Okay, so I know there's a lot of comments here, but I do want to get into the meat of this discussion, then we can kind of circle back to some other stuff. We will have Q&A time at the end of this, so if you have questions, then shoot them in the chat. I will save them for later, or Hank, if you spot them, you can save them for later.
Yeah.
And we can answer them at the end. But
Yeah.
let's talk about the midpoint. So like I just alluded to, the midpoint is sort of defined as the worst thing that happens to your protagonist up to this point. They go through their try-fail cycles. They're learning, they're adapting, they're hopefully growing, but really a lot of times they're defined as struggling to keep up or being reactive to things happening to them. They still have their own agency. They are still proactive about some things, but they're not necessarily in control of a lot of stuff. But they feel like they're getting there. They feel like growth is happening and they're getting their feet under them, and then you just yank that rug out and make them fall on their face with the midpoint. It should be a pretty rough moment for them. So, esteemed folks up here with me, tell me about your midpoint. Hank, why don't we start with you? What do you got going on?
Okay, so my book, as I've mentioned before, 2 characters kind of locked into a truck together taking a road trip. Overly simplistic, but that's the gist of it. And the hitchhiker that the driver picked up is telling him this wild story of him selling his soul to the devil, and the bargain that the devil is holding him to, where he inhabits someone else's life, and just about the time that he gets comfortable and starts forgetting his original life, he calls the debt due again, and he has to bring another sacrifice to the crossroads, and he has to inhabit another victim. So he never gets full peace, never gets full immersion, because as soon as he thinks he can, he gets the rug pulled out from under him. So up until the midpoint, Caleb, the driver, has just kind of wondered if this is just a crazy old man telling wild stories, and is not real sure what happens. But in the midpoint, there's an event that happens that causes Caleb to realize that this is not just a story he's telling, but he's the next victim. And it changes everything from him kind of reacting to the stories being told, and his passenger next to him, and whether he's actually a danger or not, to now realizing that he's up next. And he through some strange circumstances, or kind of a pseudo hypnotism of sorts, he can't just pull over and kick the guy out of the truck. It's just like there's something supernatural happening. He's kind of locked into this scenario. And now we get to the point where he's reacting to that, and he has to, one, get away from his passenger, but maybe more importantly, try to change his mind so that they can break this cycle for good. And so we're changing from the passenger recounting the story and kind of luring him in, kind of breaking down his defenses little by little, and then flipping from, okay, I'm going to be next, to how can we break this cycle?
Yeah, that's very cool. And I find your story, I mentioned this on our show on Tuesday last week, I find your story so interesting because I'm not entirely sure who the protagonist is of the two of them.
Right. Or and I'm using an omniscient narrator. I saw some discussion in the comments about third person limited. I've written quite a bit in third person limited, but also in first person. And this is the first time, I think, that I've used a third person omniscient narrator, so that I get this perspective of kind of being up and above. So you don't really get in the head of a character. It's been really interesting to see what all I can do with that. And, kind of playing with the camera and pointing around, and then getting, and then as the characters begin a flashback where they're kind of telling, where Buddy, the passenger, is recounting these stories, but then also Caleb, the driver, is thinking back on some of his own internal struggles and why this old man's story is resonating with him. He's kind of wrestling with his own demons in a way. And the flashbacks give me the opportunity to go to first person, which I'm not a real big fan of flipping from first to third, but this is a good point to do that. And it's been very helpful. So anyway, that's
cool.
Yeah.
I can't wait to read it on December 1st.
Right. Yeah, you'll be like, what are you doing? Is this English?
Josh, what about you? What do you have in store for your story's midpoint?
So around the midpoint is like you said, where everything's kind of going well, and then the rug gets pulled out from under him. My midpoint has kind of two different stages to the going worse aspect of the story, where the first part is the main character is his team is pulled away from him to go on another mission, and he decides to stay behind. And so where he's been operating with his team for the first half of the story, and they've been working together to try to solve this problem, now he doesn't have that, and he's technically going against his boss's orders, and his boss happens to be the president of the United States, and that's kind of the not a great person to irritate in terms of employer. So he's struggling with that, but also shortly after that is when the kind of it's a kidnapping of a defector happens, but they take the defector's daughter and her daughter's friend, who happens to be the daughter of the main character's friend. And so the three of those people are taken shortly after his team is pulled, and now Cooper and his friend and a couple other people that are involved by this time, they have to figure out how they're going to get the girls back and the dad back, with without the resources that he had before, and without the assistance of the team. And so it just that starts the downhill roller coaster towards act 3, or the climax. And there's a couple other things that happen too that are kind of roadblocks in that, but fortunately I think that I've planned it in such a way that he'll have resources that he doesn't realize he has, that kind of become apparent to him when everything starts going to shit, excuse my language. And um, the having to work by himself is something that he's uncomfortable with in terms of operating, because he's not a lone guy, he's a team guy. And so kind of wrestling with the going outside the box and going against the grain, if you will, is it's not sitting well with him, but he also knows that it's the right thing to do, and he's the only one that can do it. So there's the internal struggle there, but there's also the external struggle of not having any support. And hopefully I can pull that off, so it makes sense at the end. We'll see.
I do have a question for you based on that, Josh, but I do just want to point out some of the stuff going on in the chat here. So Valentine's got the midpoint where the main character decides to go to the police with everything she learns, and basically gets told by them that they don't believe her because she has no proof. Mina has time travelers that aren't believed because they lack clout, even if they have the experience to say this is suspicious, so they have to solve it by themselves. Ashley is technically past the midpoint, but still figuring out what you want it to be.
I love that.
And Erica is new to the 60-day challenge. Welcome. Just working on the current novel for at the same time, and thinks that you're at your midpoint for the main character's POV, at least. Yeah. And so when we talk about story beats like the midpoint, where it's really tied to the protagonist's journey, right? The story is the protagonist's story. Especially with a shorter novel like the ones we're writing, there's not a lot of subplots that you weave in there. So yeah, we're definitely focusing on the main character's midpoint when we're talking about this kind of writing style. But Josh, the question I had for you, with your main character being a team guy and now being solo, when I was writing during our writing sprints, my main character is now on her own. And I do that every now and then, especially in this first bit, to really reinforce that she hates this. It fills her with anxiety. She messed up before doing something by herself, and now she worries she's going to get someone else killed because she's by herself again, like the decisions that she makes. But I actually don't like writing characters by themselves. I like other characters in the scene so I can have that dialogue and that action and whatnot. So how do you keep it interesting just having one character in a scene?
Well, so he is going to have two other people that are going to help him, so he won't be technically by himself, but he is going to have to do a couple of things. A couple of the scenes that he operates in, he will be by himself. A lot of that is, um, uh, I take a lot of that opportunity to feed in his experience and what he sees that would be different from what a normal person would see or experience in that circumstance. If he's walking into a building by himself, he's going to hear things differently. He's going to smell things differently. He's going to see things differently. And I kind of use that space on the page to highlight those things instead of just kind of a really strict stage direction where he walked here and then he went up the stairs and did this. I can do a lot of things that kind of slow down the scene a little bit. Where a lot of the scenes in the book where he does have his team, there's a lot of dialogue and there's a lot of kind of internal stuff that's happening with the team that's not really expanded upon. And I usually take those scenes that just deal with one character and try to uh, color the scene a little bit differently, but also give more insight personally to the character itself, not just what
Mhm.
they're doing. Um, and in this aspect, he in terms of him being by himself or not having the team with him, he's got to for instance, he's got to engage an opponent without aerial surveillance or without, backup, without like a rear guard or anybody else that would be able to spot an ambush or see other things happening that he can't see and he can't control. And so that changes how he approaches the problem because he can't just run in and know that somebody else is going to have his back or support him from a certain direction or with like aerial capabilities or communication. And that will really kind of affect how he operates and force him to uh, really nail down his tactics. And I'm going to use that scene to kind of highlight his personal tactics versus showing how the team operates together and um, really kind of highlight his expertise in that situation. That's how
Okay.
I think of those things, because a lot of times if you're writing a scene with multiple people, say you're writing like a battle scene or a fight scene or something like that where you've got multiple people doing different things, you can't spend in my opinion anyway, you can't spend a lot of time really highlighting a certain character's talents or perspective or whatever, because you're like, oh, this guy's shooting over here or he's throwing an axe over here or
Mhm.
whatever. You're showing multiple things through those sequences, and if you've only got one guy doing something, you've got to figure out a way to do everything, and you can't hop between POVs to show different things. So it really kind of narrows the scope of what you can write.
Cool. Mina says here, I always have to not have my characters disappear into their own heads for too long, so it won't ruin the pace of what happens around them. So she found what she said interesting, and thanks. Um, yeah,
Absolutely.
no, I'm definitely gonna take that into account, especially now going forward. For leading up to my midpoint, my character will not be alone for the remainder of the book, save for one scene. Um, so it's just been these first few, like the first act has a couple of them, and so I'm like, oh, is this really the best that it can be? How can I, make this better? How can it not just be, oh, negative thought, negative thought, negative thought over and over again, right? But for my midpoint, so I haven't written my midpoint yet, because I am behind because of this trip. But because we did so much work last month outlining our stories and figuring out our characters and whatnot, I know what it's going to be. And specifically, I want to build my protagonist confidence up so that she is trusted with this decision and she feels like she can make this decision for the group, based on what she's experienced so far in the story. And then when she makes that decision, she says, okay, we're going to get one of those trains running. We're going to get these people out of this city, save their lives. No, they've been betrayed. The baddie is waiting for them at the train station, and then one of her friends dies. So when we were planning these characters, I really focused on the big hurt and the lie that comes from it for a protagonist. And her big hurt was that she got a friend killed from her actions. And now she is getting another friend killed from her actions when she was feeling confident enough to actually take action again. So I'm really, her story is brutal for her, but beautifully brutal. So that is my midpoint. I'm really picking at that scab, making her think that it's healed just a little bit, and then just opening it up again to make it even worse.
Beautifully brutal. That's
beautiful.
That's there's a lot going on in that statement there, Doug.
I called something today when I was writing in the writing sprint. I said, Robert, you have to put yours on screen because I can't share this scene on Dabble's live stream. The line is, such mutilation was beautiful. And I'm not going to elaborate on that because of the same reasons I didn't share it, but like the lines that lead up to it, or just like they hit the spot for me. Those are lines that are definitely staying. So,
and you've just had a week of vacation in the sun, and you come back with stuff like that. Imagine Doug after being locked in the snowy winter. I would expect that in March.
I long for the sun.
Right.
Well, Erica thinks it's a beautiful line, so thank you, Erica.
I didn't say it wasn't a beautiful line. I just questioned,
that was from the antagonist perspective too, just for the record. So it's extra dark.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So yeah, so any other advice for the midpoint for this kind of big moment where we say to our characters, no, you're not doing as well as you think you're doing?
I think, and this kind of goes back to a couple of things I've said previous. I think the midpoint is a great place to highlight or foreshadow the additional problems that you could have during the climax or the third act, because it's not just one point in the book. The midpoint, it spans several thousand words or several tens of thousands of words, depending on how long your book is. And you don't want to just set up the one thing that's going to push your character to fail or anything like that. You can use that to set up a lot of different elements, either foreshadowing how they're actually going to do it, foreshadowing the failure that's going to come throughout the climax. There's multiple elements that you can throw in that midpoint that are setting up the closure at the end. And I like to build that interest and intrigue through the midpoint, and again having that try fail cycle that we talked about last week, building those multiple things through the midpoint so that you're having like a significant rise in tension through the midpoint, so that when you get to the climax, it's like that roller coaster that it's slowly going up, and then you get to the top and you go all the way down. Because once you get to that point, you really have to start winding everything down, and you have to start heading towards that conclusion. And so using that elevator, that midpoint rise to seed as much of that stuff in as you can, really makes the downhill journey of the end really fast. Well, fast in terms of the way the action is going to go, because they should have everything that they need to finish the story by the end of the midpoint, by that end of the where the hump is on the roller coaster analogy that I'm using. Your character should have everything. Your story needs to have everything already painted before you get to that hump. And setting up that tension and intrigue throughout that whole section of the book is, I think, one of the best things, because then once you get to that roller coaster, it's just conclude, conclude, conclude. There's a TV show, and I can't remember what it's called now. I only watched a couple episodes because it kind of went off in the left field, but the pilot was really good, where they set up, say, 3 or 4 plot lines through the rising action of the episode, and then once the third act hit, they solved them in reverse order. I think it was a medical show, but they basically solved all of it in reverse order. And some of the stuff they solved without dialogue, or they concluded it without dialogue, and so that you still had closure to that event, but all of the things got wrapped up. And so if you think of your midpoint as setting up all these points, and you're taking, 20,000 words to set up all these points, really you have 10,000 words to close off what 20,000 words opened up, basically. And sometimes you have to do that very quickly. But that closure of all of those points was really good in that episode. Man, I can't remember what it was. I think it was New Amsterdam, maybe. It came out a couple of years ago. It was a Netflix show, but they did a really good job of doing that full closed loop at the end of the episode.
I was just talking to my brother this morning. He watched a movie on the plane on our flight back that he did not enjoy, because he said, like, in the middle of it, it was, I can't remember who was in it. I can't remember what it was about. It's been less than a day, right? It's been a few hours since he told me, but they're interrogating somebody, and our main character says to the interrogator, ask him about Jane Doe, right? And so the interrogator asks about Jane Doe, and the person getting interrogated freaks out. And then we never find out who Jane Doe is. We never know what the relevance is. So if you're like, I know that's not the explicit point you're saying there, Josh, but if you're introducing new stuff throughout the second act, or during the midpoint, or in the first act even, make sure it's resolved by the end of it, or it is intentionally unresolved. But this movie doesn't have a sequel, so we just have information that is seemingly relevant, but we don't understand, and it is not wrapped up, and that stinks.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Ashley really likes your visual of the roller coaster, though, and I do as well. So great job there.
Well, and that actually, what you say actually brings up a good point with opening something that you don't close. If it is a series and you are opening something for the second book, you can do that in the midpoint. My way of doing is usually I have like a hint of that, a hint of the open, and then I fully open it through the climax of the first book. So I do a little bit of a foreshadowing for that, and then I fully open it at the ending of the first book, so that it carries naturally and fluidly into the second book. So in that aspect, if you are writing a series and it's you're going to continue on that storyline, then opening up those plot points in the end is correct, but you have to make sure that you're closing all of the current book loops in that book that matter to that book's story. If it's a series arc, then yes, you can open them and not close them. You just have to be careful that those plot points, if they're connected directly to the first book, you want to close those before you go into the next book, if they're not like series arcs.
Yeah, and that if it's a series, that there needs to be the story of what's happening in the book, and you can have an overarching, but the reader needs to understand that this is that this is the thing we're solving now. This is a bigger thing, and sometimes it's challenging, but the reader needs that, or they may not never buy that second book if they feel like that you're just, if you just left things open, and that you have to earn their trust somehow by landing something in that first book.
Yeah. Ashley saying here, I need to learn to plan. I can usually think of and build on so many ideas, but all the elements of structure seem so daunting. Which, if you lean into all of the exercises that were in the first 30 days of the 60-day challenge, that gives you a pretty good structure to go on. That's tough to do now that we're halfway through the writing phase of it. There's only so many hours in a day. But if learning to plan and getting that structure is more important than trying to hit that 50,000 word mark this month, then I say do that. Focus on that. Right? That'll make you a stronger author.
Well, to be fair, go ahead, Hank.
I'm sorry. No. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that it's interesting that you say that, Ashley, because my mom asked me this last weekend. I was telling her about the projects I was working on, and she asked me, compared to when you first started writing, how is it easier now or harder? And I said, well, it's easier in the fact that I don't have to think about the structure or the parts that I need to do. It's all intuitive. I can look at the story and go, this is where I need these things to happen at. But it's harder because I know what I'm doing now. And so if I get to a place and I go, that's wrong, I have to fix it instead of being like blissfully ignorant of what I'm doing and just having fun writing the story. But again, a lot of this stuff, like I've been a professional author since 2017, and I've been doing it for a really long time before that. And so a lot of these things are really intuitive and I don't have to think about them. But if you're doing it for the first time or even your first couple of times, even just knowing what the structure is, knowing what the 3-act structure is, all of those things are really kind of alien and don't make any sense. And they can inhibit the writing of words if that's all you're trying to do, because they're both, the skills are separate almost. Like the writing is one skill and the knowledge of the structure and all of that is something else. And so, like you said, if you're just trying to learn the structure, then really focus on that and don't worry about the words too much. But if you're looking at just practicing, getting the words down, get all the words down and look at it after you kind of learn a little bit more about that structure and then piece that stuff back together. It's like editing. You can't edit a blank page. You can't look at the story. If you don't understand intuitively what you're doing with the manuscript, getting the story down and then looking at it in terms of structure will help you see where you need to move things around or adjust or things like that. It's all just stages of learning the process.
Yeah. And Hank, before I let you say whatever you were going to say, I just want to add on for this specifically, because what Josh brought up, if some easy homework, if you really want to practice understanding the 3-act structure, just analyze a movie after you watch it. Like basically almost all movies follow a 3-act structure. There are very few that don't. Then it's all beginning, middle, end, exposition, inciting incident, rising action, devastating midpoint, reaction, climax, right? So you don't have to do it while you're watching the movie. You might start doing it while you watch the movie, but hour and a half of watching and then just think about it. Like bounce off your partner or your friend or whomever. Like, it's easy exercise, fun. Your homework's watch a movie. So
yeah. But don't make the mistake that I make a lot of times, because I'll be watching a movie with my whole family and I'm like, well, that was obviously the end of Act 2. And everybody will just turn, look at me and like, Dad? And I'm like, sorry. But I was just going to say earlier to Ashley's comment where she said, I need to learn to plan. I can usually think of and build on so many ideas, but all the elements of structure seem so daunting. It took me like 8 years of writing novels to become a planner, and I blame Josh Hayes for that.
You're welcome.
So many times, so many conversations Josh and I have had over the years, and he just berated me for not planning. And whatever it was, there was something that finally made it click for me. And up until that point, I think I saw somebody else say this. Yeah, Valentine said, I think I'm going to get my 50K done, then go through and fully plan it. And that's what I used to do. I wouldn't fully plan it. I always held a plan in my head, but there was a lot of murkiness that would happen. And I would finish the book, and then I would go through and identify all of the parts, and then, try to move them around and see if I had fully connected this piece to that piece. And I was doing the planning, I was just doing it after the fact. And, and I kept telling myself that that's what made sense to me. And I think I was just scared of trying to untwist all the knots ahead of time. And when I finally got over that fear for whatever caused it, it completely changed my creative process.
Now, for some people,
well, and at point of fact, like I kind of mentioned it at the beginning of the show, but the chapter that I wrote from the cartel guy's POV, I wrote almost an entire chapter in a POV that I found out at the end I couldn't use because I didn't want to use that. But all of that, that writing that I did gave me it gave me the setting. I could see where the people were at. I could know what they were thinking.
Yeah.
And that base plan allowed me to go back and adjust and get the same idea and the same narrative information to the reader. But it allowed me to kind of work through what am I going to do with this scene and how I'm going to do it. And then I just went back and wrote it. So I had the plan of what I needed. And I wrote a whole bunch of words that I couldn't use, but those words were extremely helpful in getting my mind wrapped around exactly what I needed to do with that scene. And on a grander scale, that can work for books. You will have to delete words and you will have to move things around, but don't be scared of that. I delete stuff all the time.
Yeah. And I think I mentioned this in the show earlier. I still, even though I embrace the planning life, when I'm starting a new book, I always kind of rewrite 2 or 3 chapters just to kind of learn who my characters are and get a feel for the setting. Sometimes I take that stuff that I've written and it becomes part of chapter 1 or whatever, or maybe a prologue or something. And sometimes it's just purely for me, just to kind of get a feel. But a lot of times I will uncover a question or find some kind of mystery in the way this person does whatever. And that allows me to then think of an inciting incident, something to build the plot around. But it almost comes out of just free writing. And I really have no idea who these people are, or even what they're up to. But I discover that. And then once I've discovered it, then I start building a plan. So I kind of embrace both worlds, at least in the beginning. But it's whatever you figured out that makes it all click for you. There's no right way or wrong way. There's just things that we have figured out that work for us. And you have to, the structures definitely help, but you have to figure out where you fit within that structure as well.
Yeah.
And it's helpful. I've said this to Hank before, but like as people, we're natural storytellers, right? To different degrees, depending on the person. And we naturally lean towards the 3-act structure at a basic form, beginning, middle, and end. If I ask you how your day went, you're going to tell me a beginning, middle, and end structured story. You might, throw in some extra details there. You might circle back somewhere and, highlight something, but that's just how we describe things to one another because it logically makes sense. So you learn more as you write it. You learn more as you study it. You learn more as you read about it. But you're on the right track. As it's just doing this challenge, you're on the right track.
Yeah.
There's also been some Transformers hate going on in the chat. I personally love the Transformers movies because they're so boom boom shoot, but there is an arc to them, and that's the thing. So Mina pointed out French movies don't necessarily follow the 3-act structure, and maybe some indie movies or some art house movies won't follow a 3-act structure. But you look at commercial movies, the movies that are most widely consumed, it's all 3-act structure. Rom-coms, action movies, thrillers, all 3-act structure.
Yeah. Can we look at whose comment was it? Shoot, where did it go?
Riverstar here.
Maybe
this one.
Yes.
Yeah,
I never
I knew
deleted
you were gonna.
something. Actually, that wasn't it, but it is a great comment. What's the comment? Oh, here it is, Paula. I'm still having problems with deleting some of my story. Tweaking it's not a problem, but delete scenes scares me. Yes, me too. But that's where, in programs like Dabble, where you have the ability to, like under story notes, I will almost always create a folder and just call it recycle scenes or notes, or call it whatever you want to. But I will create a note under that folder and just paste it in there and never throw anything away. Hold it somewhere for review later. And another thing that I've been doing during this challenge is when I go back and onion my writing for the day, to borrow a phrase from Steve Bollier. I used to always, if I wanted to change a line, I would just delete it and then type the new thing. But what I've started doing in this challenge is to cross out the text that I'm going to get rid of and then type in next to it my change. And what I found is, one, you don't lose your word count for the day because this is a challenge. But more than that, it leaves a trail that when I go back later, when I'm doing an official edit, like maybe of my second revision edit or whatever, I can see what I was thinking. I can see what my original thought was, and I can see what my edited thought, in the moment. And that gives me a chance to see, well, is there anything in my original way that I stated that could be saved? Could I work that in somewhere? Is that detail that could be placed somewhere else? It just gives me a way to follow what I was thinking, instead of that original thought just being lost to middle-aged memory that is not as good as it once was. But you can follow your thought process, and that has been extremely helpful for me to just this little breadcrumbs as to where that thought came from and how it evolved.
So Doug, I put in my Dabble screen in the green room, if you could see that. And while Hank was saying this is what my first draft of my first chapter looks like. And all of that stuff is in there, so you can see where I've put big spaces, and I've got huge sections of lined out text that I don't need anymore. And there's like a bunch of words that I'm not using that I just left in there that I can go back and see. And that's what I do all the time, whether it's for this challenge or I'm just writing normally, until I'm ready to pull this like this is in one chapter, but it's actually 3. I've split it. I don't know where the chapter break is. It's somewhere down here. I might have already passed one. Oh, I didn't put it in this one. I put it in my export doc, but I have that strike through text all over the place, and big lines and big spaces where I started to type a sentence, didn't like it, hit enter, started typing again, hit enter. So I do that all the time.
Interesting.
And by the way, I asked the Dabble developers last week because a lot of times I'm writing on my phone in the mornings on a small screen to keep things as distraction free as I can, and I would always have to figure out a way to highlight the text and then go to the pop-up menu for strike through. And I discovered a key combination that Jacob himself forgot that he put in there. And if you highlight the text, but with your arrow keys and the shift key, and hit Control D, as in dog, that enables strike through, and you never have to take your hands off the keyboard.
Nice.
Yeah.
Super, super helpful for me. So hope that helps somebody else.
Okay, I'm gonna push us forward for the sake of time. So following the midpoint, following this carpet pull, smack them upside the head kind of moment, our characters have to dwell on that. They have to learn from that, and then eventually, as I said before, they're reactive for most of the first part of the story. They have this mindset shift to proactive. And so I want to pick both your brains about this sort of reaction to the midpoint and this mindset shift, specifically how, like, no one wants to read, wow, that really hurt, I'm gonna go beat the bad guy, right? Like that's awful, that's gross, no matter how you phrase that. So how do you make that mindset shift and this reaction to a devastating event feel organic for your character?
For for me, it has been that my character has to there have to be some consequences. There has to be a reason that he just doesn't come upon an epiphany that, oh, I should be a better person. There has to be some skin in the game. That has been helpful. Also, a big challenge for me going forward is to how to show the world getting darker as it goes without, I mean, they're already driving down a dark highway in the middle of night, and it's already dark, and then the tension in the truck, you can only say the tension was palpable, so many times. And you said, how do I keep building the tension when it's already a very tense situation? So there, you have to find new ways of bringing some external something externally to affect them, and then there be some sort of change within your character that makes them want to react. There's nothing worse than reading a book or watching a movie and the person just has an epiphany one moment. I should be a better person. Well, why? Because I've never had a moment like that unless I was forced to. I mean, as humans, we never just wake up one morning and just decide I should be a better person. There's usually some external stimuli.
Well, and to that point, Mina mentioned before that there's that point of no return moment for the character related to the midpoint, and that's from that consequence that you just mentioned, right? If they don't change to proactive, then things will just continue to get worse, and the worst thing possible will happen to them. So they have to, like, there's something driving them. Yeah, Josh, what about you?
Well, my character, just because of his nature, is mostly proactive anyway. But the reactive part of the story arc is the team trying to figure out what's going on and identifying who the enemy is. And once they identify who the enemy is, then it shifts to the quote unquote proactive sequences where now they're trying to figure out how to defeat the enemy. And while they're mostly proactive through the entire book, it really, they react to certain events that force them to do different things. Even though those things are proactive, they are reacting to events. And in the after the midpoint kind of turn there, instead of them acting on the defense and reacting to all of these events, now they are forcing the events happening by basically charging into the battle and going after the bad guys rather than reacting to what they're doing. So they're mostly always proactive, but that reactive nature comes with their decision to, if we don't go now, we're going to lose. And so it switches, and then they start charging forward, and then everything that happens, even the continued kind of fail through the climax, that is all a response to them charging in and racing towards the finish line, if you want to call it that. I think sometimes you can confuse the reactive to proactive shift in a book, that the characters don't do anything on their own. They're always reacting to something, and that's not true to the letter of what you're saying. They are proactive and they are doing proactive things, but through that proactive nature of their character, they are still reacting to things rather than just being like blanket statement. They're just reacting to things and they're on the defense or whatever it is. So kind of a really fine line when you start talking. Again, this goes back to experience and knowing what the terms are. It's not just them quote unquote always reacting to something. They have to be proactive in that reaction, if you want to call it that. But it's the offense, the defense to offense. You know what I mean? Like there's two different approaches to those angles, and once you shift to that offensive nature of the character, he's still going to be reacting to things in that offensive phase, but what he's reacting to are things that are happening because of his actions now.
Yeah, your character should always have agency
Yes.
when they're going through the story, right? It's just it feels, I guess, to the reader and to the character like they have less control over the situation in the first act and the first part of the second act, and then the midpoint happens, and they might even have like a goal shift. Yours specifically, they find out who the real, bad guys are, and so they have a concrete goal shift at some point. But it might be, hey, we have the same ultimate goal, but how I get there shifts as well, and so then I'm more offensive in my actions to get to that new goal or to go down this new path.
Right.
Omer, I'm gonna save that question till the end for a Q&A period because I think it's a very good question. I just want to make sure that we get through all of the content before we get too sidetracked, because I think we have a tendency to just talk, which is fine. And I love it. I think it makes for a good show, but we got to make sure to get through all of the stuff. So are there any things in this instance when they're having that shift, when they're moving through the midpoint and now progressing towards the third act, are there anything specifically people should avoid? Any no-nos, any, must not do's?
Oh, I know that there are. Now I can't think of any.
Yeah, same. I'm like,
See, now, and if I wasn't on a plane till 1 a.m, you could have had more lead time on this, but
right. No, I think one of the things you probably should avoid is a kind of backslide in the growing intensity of the story, especially at the end of your midpoint, or the back third of your midpoint. There really should not be a backslide in action or agency or intensity to the story. It should always be building. So if like, say, I'll use a round number so it's easier to visualize. If you're writing a 100,000 word book and you're visualizing 50,000 words as your midpoint, you don't want to build the action up to that 50,000 words and then use 10,000 words of, I don't know, self-reflective thought or something like that. Something that is really just, it doesn't feed the story. It doesn't do anything to push the action or to increase the intensity of the story. It's just like we're running and we're being chased by a herd of gazelles, and we get to the end of a cliff, and then we start talking about your traumatic childhood or something. Like, don't like do that abrupt shift. If that childhood thing matters to the story, that needs to happen in the beginning part, and once you start getting to that end sequence of the end of the midpoint, everything that you're piling in there really needs to ramp up everything, so that you don't have any backslide in that intensity.
Yeah, great tip. Ginger, yes, we do tend to run more than an hour with this. There's a lot to cover. Yeah, it is Hank's fault. We try and stick to the hour. I think we've been successful once. So but it is available for replay. It's successful-ish. We're almost done though. Hank, do you have any no-nos?
Not really. I think other than what Josh said, I think you don't want to, and this goes to a little bit of Omer's question, is that you don't want to, the best way to avoid a muddy middle is to not bring things in that muddy things up. Keep your focus moving forward. Keep Like Josh said, don't bring things in that bog down the story. If you feel like it's important to the story, find an appropriate place to bring that in, or at least tease it earlier, so it doesn't feel like you're just wandering through the middle.
Yeah,
that's all I'll say.
Valentine tells her husband it's an hour, so give me an hour and a half. NJ says hour-ish.
yeah.
And we're cutting it there. No.
But actually, there's I'm reading a book right now. I'm not going to mention the name of the book or the author, but he's a fairly well-known author, and I'm about 30% into this book, and there are significant points in this book that I'm skipping, because there are pages and pages of not necessarily exposition, but it's definitely information that doesn't matter at all to what the character is doing at that point in time. Walking through a city and listening to conversations that don't matter at all, and highlighting things that don't matter at all. And I see this a lot when you're trying to hit word counts. But it really, really drags the story down. If you can just knock all of that intro out, a lot of I won't say a lot, but I have read several books where almost every chapter is filled with, say, 70% fill or fluff, and then the last 30% is what matters. And if every chapter is like that it can get very, very, very dull very fast, because then you are conditioning yourself to go, none of this stuff matters. I can skip through all of it and get to the end. So, and that kind of goes with the murky middle as well. If if you know that you need to get to a certain point, but you don't have anything interesting to happen before that, don't fill it with anything. Just get to that midpoint. Just start writing there and go from there. And that way you don't get locked in, because inevitably you'll get to that point on the roller coaster we talked about earlier, where you're tipping over and you realize, oh, I do need a story about a traumatic childhood. Well, don't put it in there. Go back into the midpoint and find the place to put it there. Token cough, right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But yeah, they're especially in your first draft, if you're struggling in that middle to get to that point, just get to that point and hit the main events, have your characters do the things that they need to do to get there. And then if you get to that rising action, or you get to the start of your third act and you realize you don't have a component of this or an element of that, you can go back in and work that back into the middle in a way that it fits and keeps the story rolling without slowing the action down when you get to that third act.
Yeah, the last thing you want to ever see is a subreddit created, and the gist is, man, I love Josh Hayes' books, but you only have to read the last 2 pages of every chapter. And
yeah. First of all, even if that was a subreddit on a Josh Hayes subreddit, I'd be cool with it, because then I'd have my own subreddit. So somebody create it, and then
all the time.
Yeah. Do I have one? I don't even know if I have one. Now I have to go look.
That's your homework. To both Mina's point about Tolkien and Valentine's point about George Orwell, that it is very, if you look at like classics or older books, they do tend to be more rambly like that. They tend to be a little fluffier. And that was just like writing evolves and language evolves and storytelling evolves. We aren't as tolerant about that anymore, because time's precious, man. Like I don't have hours to spend on exposition, even in fantasy.
Said, wasn't Dickens the real OG of filler? Well, most of Dickens' works were printed serially in the newspaper, weren't they?
A lot of them were, I think.
I think so. So that kind of, filler is the name of the game when you're getting paid by the word.
Yeah.
I don't have a subreddit, if you were wondering.
Oh.
I just
sorry, Josh.
By tomorrow.
I don't either. Okay, last topic for conversation before we assign some homework and do some Q&A. Hopefully be done by the hour and a half mark. I've mentioned more than once, been on a trip. I did not write as much as I thought I was going to. I had great aspirations to write my word count every day. I did not. I'm very far behind. So for folks like me and other people out there who are behind on their 60-day challenge word count or their nano word count, what advice do you excellent writers have to get back into it, to maybe catch up or to even get ahead so that your daily word count goal is a little lower than it might be right now? Mine's ballooned up to like 2,100 words from 1667. So
Well, my biggest piece of advice would be like, don't worry about it. Do
fair.
not stress about that. If you get behind, and I have a couple of friends that they're writing multiple projects, and they have multiple deadlines, and they're like, I have to write 5,000 words a day on this one project to get caught up. You get to a point where it's not feasible, and then you get to a point where you're looking at the daily word count that you need to hit, and it just seems undoable. Like it's impossible to hit all of this every day. If you get to that point, don't worry about it. Just keep plugging away. Um, the Any progress is forward progress, right? But that being said, for me, I know that I've got to hit more than the 1,600 words. Even when I started this week, my dailies is like 2,700 words a day. But I try not to look at those totals while I'm writing. I just kind of write and go. And then the next day when I open the document, I look and I see, oh, okay, I've got some words down. But like you said about, having it on your phone or finding a couple of minutes here and there, yeah, if you can get 200 or 300 words here, 203 words before dinner or when you're laying in bed or whatever, all that stuff adds up. And you don't have to have hours and hours of just sitting in your chair looking at your computer screen. Sit down, get 1,000, get 2,000 words or whatever. And then while you're walking around, if an idea hits you or if the inspiration hits you, pull out your phone, jot down 200 or 300 words, and those will add up. And then you
Yep.
will get closer to that goal. Um, but the biggest thing is honestly don't get depressed about the numbers. Don't get fixated
Mhm.
on the numbers, because if you do, those can handicap you going forward. And say you get to 30,000 words and you get stuck for a couple of days, and now you're looking at your word count going, there's no way that I can hit it. It's
Yeah.
okay. Just keep going. Like the world is not going to end if you don't get 50,000 words.
Mhm.
And most people don't get 30 in a month. So if you got 30 and you didn't get 50, then you are in like the top 0.000% of whatever for getting those words done.
Yeah.
That's my inspirational advice for the day.
No, that's
Um,
really good.
one piece of inspirational advice I would say, and this is not advice that I normally take because I'm a little more anal retentive than this. I tend to write linearly from beginning to end, and but since I have a plan and I know what each scene of my book needs to accomplish, if I'm having a rough day where the words just aren't coming, I could flip through my plot grid, find a scene that really excites me and write that scene. And
Mhm.
if the words are just having trouble coming, and I'm like, well, I need to get 2,000 words today, but I'm really not feeling this scene. I'll bet there's a scene in my plot grid that does excite me and that I do feel inspired by. Go write that scene and get that in, and then come back to what you're working on now. Maybe tomorrow, maybe writing this other scene will have unlocked something for you, or maybe writing that will have given you a clue of something that needs to happen previously that now will help you over that. So I would say, if you're a planner, go write something out of order. There's something in your plan that excites you, or you wouldn't have planned it that way. Go find something that does, and see if that just won't get the gears lubricated to keep going. And then NJ um, said, I replay the word sprints on my dead days. That's a fantastic idea. We're doing sprints every day, Monday through Friday, for this entire month, and they're all archived on our YouTube channel. They will be there
Mhm.
for time immemorial. Just go to our YouTube channel, click on the live tab, pick any one of those writing sprint days, and there's 3 20-minute writing sprints there with a few minutes in between each one. Jump in, even though it happened in the past, it's still just as motivational. You feel like you're inspired by the group, and those tools will be there as long as you need them to.
Yeah. I want to point out a couple of things in the chat here too. First, Veronica saying that's really encouraging to hear that I'm behind, because I think a lot of people are behind at this point, or they will be behind. So it happens, right? It happens to everyone, even the best of us. But Valentine also said no 0 days helps a lot. And that's something I really focused on when I was gone, is that even if I couldn't sit down and write for 15, 20 minutes, I could still whip out my phone. There was a lot of waiting for people at a restaurant or on the beach or whatever. Pull out my phone, write 20 words. 20 words is still more than 0 words. It's still progress for the day. So very good tips, gentlemen, especially Josh. I really like yours, because that's something that we kind of beat on a lot, is that 50,000 words is a very good goal. But it's not a good goal if it's not feasible or achievable at some point. And when I co-authored last year, one of the things that burned me out is that I had that hard deadline, like a contractual deadline, and due to life and admittedly time management skills that aren't fully developed, I was writing 4,000 words in a day on top of working full time, right? Sometimes more than full time. That's not healthy. It's not good for you. So like, be aware of what your own limits are and enjoy this. This is a challenge it's hard, but it's fun. It's supposed to be fun. We write because we like it.
Yep.
Kara said that she honestly doesn't see what people are referring to as filler in stories by Orwell or Dickens is a bad thing, because it's scene setting or world building. That's true, right? And I think there are different preferences for things as well. There's a lot of fantasy out there, Tolkien aside, modern fantasy, that is heavier on exposition or heavier on world building or heavier on, Sanderson has, how long of a prologue? Like a million word prologue or something?
It's like
right?
5,000, 6,000 words for both, for each of them, and there's a couple of them.
Yeah. So different people like different things. I think especially for a shorter work, like 50,000 words, but just in general too, for publishing, you want to keep most things relevant. But I am a fan of Adam Neville, who's a horror author who really embraces like a very detailed description of some settings, and some people just don't like that. Sometimes I don't like it. I think, did we lose Josh? Maybe.
Looks like we lost.
That's okay. Okay, we'll wait for him to come back in. See if. Okay. Let's move on to our last little bit. We're going to assign some homework, and then we have a couple questions to cover here. So, your homework, I mean, it's really the same as it has been for the last couple of weeks. Keep writing, right? Get that writing in, even if you aren't hitting, even if your goal has ballooned to something that isn't feasible today, then I still want you writing, 250 words, 500 words, 1,600 words, if that's doable for you. You just heard a yawn. That's my dog came to join me down here. She's never made an appearance on a live stream before, but she's been missing me for the last week, so she's here. Then your other homework is post on the Storycraft Cafe. Join us, support one another, share your wins, share your struggles. I have over 100 notifications on the cafe because the internet at the resort was not good. So I have a lot of catching up to do between today and tomorrow. So hopefully I can see you there. And join our writing sprints. We're still doing them Monday to Friday, like Hank said. We do them at 12:30 every day. We had a writing marathon last week, I believe, whilst I was gone.
Yeah, I think Robert did one Monday or Tuesday of this week. I think he did a 3-hour sprint by himself. Just
Robert's killing it.
Yeah, just going nuts. Probably needs a new keyboard by this point.
All right. And beyond that, I mean, it is just writing. We're now at about the 50% mark of the month, so just keep it up. Now we had we had Omer's question here that I want to get to for the Q&A, and if you have any other questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. But can you talk about your strategies, how you overcome the Act 2 desert, or the muddy middle, as we often call it, where for most writers the fuel runs out? It's the least outlined act, and I always have trouble with that part. I really like that Omer included it's the least outlined act, because even though I tend to skew more towards the plotting side of the plotter pantser spectrum, the second part of the second act, like the second half of it, is a lot less outlined than the exciting first bit and the climax and the rising action part. So, any advice here, gents?
I have learned to anticipate the muddy middle from the beginning, and when I plan, I look for instances where I can add some more mystery, add a question in there that can be answered, add something that keeps pushing forward. So even though the grand arc of our story goes up and then comes down with the resolution, there are places on that upward trend where we can add small peaks and valleys in there. So to me, and this is where having the plot grid really helps me, because I can see from a bird's eye view. And I talked to so many people at Author Nation this week about the plot grid and how it gives you a bird's eye view of your story and kind of being able to step back and look at the grand arc of it. And that really helps me identify, okay, this is where things are going to get a little slow and muddy. So what can I inject here? And maybe it's something that's a small problem that can be addressed and another little try-fail cycle, but that will ultimately affect the grand arc as well. So for me, it's just looking at it, standing back and looking for places that are going to sag a little bit and finding new mini games, side quests that can, boost the overall story.
I actually love the middle of the book. I love writing middles, just because, like Hank said, and like Omer said, it's the least outlined. So it's the place in the manuscript that I do the most quote unquote blind writing, where I don't know what's going in there. A lot of the time it's because for me, I use the middle to do like 4 or 5 different things that are important to the story, which is building on the initial setup and expanding the events around that, or the knowledge, or whatever the inciting incident or just the initial setup of the book was. You can build onto that through the middle. You build a lot of character in the middle, and you use the middle to solve some of the problems that you set up in the beginning, but you also create different ones. And in creating different ones, you're also setting up the ending at the same time. And you do all of those things simultaneously. And a lot of the problem solving work that I do in the middle, I hadn't done, or I haven't done in the outline or in the planning stages, where I'll create a problem and know that I have to solve it, but I don't know how I'm going to solve it, technically speaking. And so I will use a lot of that page space to work out how I'm going to solve it. And then the characters have to figure that out too, because it's not just me knowing that they need a hammer. The character has to know they need a hammer. And so they have to figure that out too. And so I don't ever get lost there. Sometimes it takes me a little longer just because it's not planned. Excuse me, I got the hiccups. It's not technically planned, and so it takes me a little while to kind of get to that point and work it out. But the midpoint, the murky middle, I think is a bad rap because people don't understand what they can do with it.
Right. I agree with you. I think it does get a bad rap because, and for whatever reason, like Omer said, it's maybe the least outlined, but it shouldn't be. Like I alluded to, that like this is an opportunity for you to get your plan together and see what's happening before you start writing and you get muddied down. This is what's the old saying, the 5 P's: proper planning prevents poor performance, or something like that. Something if you put in something like
probably
that, I remember my football coach in high school saying that over and over and over again. But it's that a little time up front saves you from that stuff down the road. And if you The planning phase is the perfect time to look at that and anticipate those problems before they happen.
Yeah, which is why we spent so much time planning in October, right?
Exactly.
And if your outline is lacking in that area, take a little bit of time before you get there to add flesh to it.
Right.
And I think that kind of through one or two things that you both said, we answered Omer's second question, which was, do you incorporate the mysteries in the outline or while drafting the first act? You either include it in the outline if you've done that outline work, or you use that time, that space in the second act to explore. Right? I think one of the muddiest parts of the muddy middle, or the murkiest parts of the murky middle, however you want to call it, is just your enthusiasm and your excitement runs out when you're trying to cram so many words into a month.
Right.
Nora, what are you doing? All right. So the last question, this is a quick one for Valentine. Is there a word count I should be staying under in the mystery genre? I think most mysteries tend to run 80,000 words.
I was about to say 80 to 90,000 is,
yeah.
I think, is kind of the sweet spot. Josh, you're the acquisitions editor for Athon for this genre. What are y'all?
Yeah, thriller and mystery. 80,000 is a good.
Yeah,
it's a good starting point. It's a good average. It really depends on the type of mystery that you're writing. If you're, cozy mystery, generally it will be shorter. If it's a more involved, like police procedural or something like that, those can tend to be a little longer. It really, any mystery between 75 and 100,000 words, you're in the sweet spot there.
Excellent. All right. Well, I'm getting begged to get off this show right now.
What are you doing, Dad?
She didn't see me in a week. She's seen me for like 2 hours in the last 7 days. So, Riverstar sci-fi fantasy word count can be 100,000 plus. Can be pretty big.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're going to have a longer word count in sci-fi and fantasy just because of the world building. So typically that's understood to be at least 100,000.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you for the great questions and the good conversation. Hopefully you picked up something and you're excited to go into this second part of the second act if you're following along at the pace that I'm trying to catch up to, and that these excellent individuals in front of me have already exceeded, it seems. But we are having our final 60-day show next Thursday, where we're talking about the third act, the pre-climax, the climax, and the falling action. But we also have a couple other events next week that, I have to tease because I always share more than people often want me to, because we're supposed to keep some events a secret. But 1 p.m. Eastern on Monday, Hank, you are talking with paranormal romance and romantasy author Sarah Hawley, which is very exciting. I'm really looking forward to that one. And then at 2 p.m. on Tuesday, Sarah Cannon is a friend of the show, very successful author, and she's coming in to do a workshop. Hank, can you give us a quick summary about what that is?
I could if I could pull my email up real quick.
That's okay. I think it's attracting readers through the joy of writing, I believe, right?
Joy of writing. And fun fact, when I was at Author Nation the other day, Sarah popped into our booth and said, "Hey," and we took a picture together. So I'll post it in the Storycraft Cafe. Yeah. But yeah, we're going to talk about the joy of writing, and because it's this workshop is coming kind of later in our challenge. She also has some workshops that she does about planning and things like that. But at this point, we're going to talk about going from your writing for the first time, maybe, or kind of building yourself up as a writer, to then taking that into a career and being a lifelong writer and not just a hobbyist who does one challenge. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Sarah has a lot of wisdom and things that we can take from that.
Excellent. And I'm just dropping in the chat here for Riverstar for our November events and daily resources and videos, dabblewriter.com/NaNoWriMo. We have like a little advent calendar going on, or you can join us at the Storycraft Cafe.
Yeah.
So on behalf of these fantastic folks, fantastic guys. I'm running out of synonyms here. And alongside me here, thank you for joining us. We will see you next week. Happy writing, everyone.